There were visible, obvious signs from my skin, from weight gain, from mood, obviously in tandem with that period of time through the menopause as well. But that wasn't really the problem. The problem was my mental health, if you like, around it. I really didn't like myself. So you ask the question, what was it like? And I'm going to use some quite strong descriptors here. I was really disgusted with myself. I was repulsed by my dishonesty.
Welcome to the Menopause Mindset Podcast, the place to get some answers and feel supported along this often a bumpy journey. Many people sail through menopause, but many people don't. And so my guests and I are here to motivate you and inspire you so that you can make menopause a happier transition for yourself and for your loved ones. I'm Sally Garozzo, an award-winning clinical hypnotherapist, a menopause educator, and I can't wait to share my passion about wellness and how we navigate these changes and transitions. So come on then, let's dive in. So my guest today is Gill McKay. Gill runs Inquisitive Coaching, helping professional, successful midlife women to break free from the hold of alcohol and start living a life on their own terms, a life they don't want to escape from. She also works with teams and organisations to open up the conversation around alcohol and stop the stigma around sobriety and sober curiosity. Her 3-month Sober Joy program gives clients the tools to replenish their nervous system so that they can make different choices without endless willpower, cravings, or doubts. Through a mixture of coaching and somatic work, alcohol becomes less important and eventually irrelevant in their lives. With a background in neuroscience, Gill is also a mental health first aider, a TEDx speaker, and a best-selling author of Stuck, Brain Smart Insights for Coaches. She's also currently writing her second book, Freedom, Design the Alcohol-Free Life of Your Dreams, which shares her own journey to happily ditching the booze for good. And in this book, she provides a framework for readers to use when they are ready to do the same. So Gill, a very warm welcome to the podcast today. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me, Sally. I do appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I am so delighted we've got you on the pod because I'm hugely fascinated by the subject of sobriety, mainly because it's such a wide topic, which includes, deep personal stories, often with a lot of tragedy and a lot of trauma as well at the core. It also encompasses the physical element, as in, what alcohol is doing to our nervous system and our brain and our chemistry, and the social element too. So I think that's where I'd like to start, if that's okay with you. Just want to give you a little bit of background about me and the listeners as well might not know. I'm half Sicilian, and when I was a young adult, 20s, sort of entrenched in booze culture in southeast London where I grew up, my Sicilian cousin who lived in Sicily came to the pub with me, and you could tell that she really wasn't like digging the vibe at all, because I think, in Sicily, the young people don't really have the same relationship with alcohol as we do. And now I am where she is. Like, I don't drink very much at all. I might have a little sip here and there. I can very much feel into now what she must have been feeling, that sense of alienation, that sense of like isolation. So yeah, it's been a really good experience for me and to sort of think back to that memory. So I'd love to hear from you about how and why we have become so enmeshed with alcohol in our society, especially British society. Why do we have this kind of odd relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, what an amazing question. I wish I knew a pure answer, because if we had a pure answer, we might be able to unpick the pure answer and do something specifically about it. I think it's a lot of this is around the pub culture, isn't it? So much of that is how pubs have developed. And I remember when I was working in London, when I first moved down into London in the late 1980s, there was this sort of very modern thing that came about called wine bars. So, a little bit of sophistication. I was brought up in the north of England. I don't think we had a wine bar in the town that I grew up in. It was all the pub culture. Coming down to London and the wine bars was another amazing thing. But the thing is that these hostelries, these places to go for entertainment and socialization, they didn't involve food. They were purely, they do now. And thankfully, there's an awful lot around the gastropub thing. That's a real thing, isn't it? But in those days, yes, you might be able to get a bite to eat, but it certainly wasn't the way that those venues advertised themselves. They were there on our high street, on every single corner, for the purpose of socializing and for drinking. And I think some of that sort of culture, particularly in the north where I came from, came about from people leaving their work. Perhaps I was brought up in Lancashire, a northern town, so it was full of factories. It used to be a mill town when I was brought up. And people would leave the factories and they'd go to the pub as a demarcated end to the day. And I think that must be part of where this has come from, maybe a love of sport at weekends, and that also has been enmeshed around, enjoying the sport, enjoying the football, enjoying the rugby, and therefore the combination of that with the alcohol. It's really interesting. And I also think it does differ perhaps city to city, that there are some cities in the UK that are hailed as being, boozy party cities, even now, more than others. And you're absolutely right. It's so interesting about your cousin from Sicily and their reaction to this boozy Britain, but maybe also the bingy boozy Britain. So I think there's some history around the pubs being on every corner, and how that has going forward perhaps into the wine bar culture, the sophisticated wine bar culture. And then when I moved down to London in the late 80s to work, it wasn't just after work, Sally. It was at lunchtime. It was almost like a badge of honour of how successful you were if you were able to go to the pub and have a few glasses of wine or beer at lunchtime. It was just, as culture happens, what we did. It was embedded in almost the code of behaviour in the organisation I worked for. And this was a big, successful American tech corporate. And honestly, half of the staff could be found in the local wine bars and the local pub in the sort of central London area between 12 and 2, sometimes, occasionally celebrating with customers, but most often or not celebrating or just drinking with team members.
So it kind of breaks down those barriers, doesn't it, in a way, and helps sort of expedite social connection. It hotwires social connection. So when a social connection is required, especially for business, then why wouldn't you introduce alcohol into the equation? And then, of course, with all of the addictive qualities that alcohol creates in the body, it just self-perpetuates, really.
Yeah, absolutely so. I mean, alcohol is very much used as a social lubricant. And I think it's something that I really want to work on more and more these days with organizations, is around the whole area of inclusion, because increasingly not everyone drinks, and increasingly so many assumptions are made about, if we even look at non-customer relationships, if we look at team relationships, why does a team event, a team building activity, a team strategy session have to end up with a night on the tiles? I'm being quite facetious here, but it's almost as if it's a given that a Christmas party, that a team get together for whatever purpose it might be, will involve alcohol. And yes, absolutely, alcohol is a social lubricant. It does help to negate the nerves, or it does in the first instance. It can cut across the nervousness of a social interaction, maybe a business interaction when you're meeting somebody, and it's a piece of common ground, isn't it, to clink a glass and be introduced to somebody and to share in that convivial atmosphere. But I think that's changing now. I think there is more of an assumption around alcohol being the best way for people to socially integrate and to socially enjoy each other's company. I'm finding that increasingly it is less inclusive. My youngest has gone to university and she doesn't drink. And I found it quite interesting that she was nervous over and above the nerves of leaving home and going to uni. She was nervous about the fact that she didn't drink, but she needn't have been nervous, as it turned out. I mean, I think it was helped by the group of people that she got involved with. Her first group of friends were very empathetic, and not everyone drank either. Increasingly, the younger demographic are choosing not to, for lots of reasons, I assume, probably not least money. But it's an interesting one. I think we're going to see some changes in social dynamics as we move forward in the next few decades around drinking.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. It makes me think, I wonder if that's because younger people are on their phones more and less in the pub more. So they're actually less around alcohol.
Yeah, it could very well be that. I think that that the whole cost of living piece has a bit to do with it. I
Sure.
also think my observation as well has been that it's almost like the post-university, which is, forgive me for saying it, it's almost like the rite of passage of going and trying out everything you possibly can when you first leave home. But for a couple of decades, and that sounds like many years now, I feel there has been a post-university hiking, biking, barista type of lifestyle, really, well, maybe 1 decade or so, rather than, at the ages of 23, 24, the pre-kids kind of demographic have very much got more into health, and they're socialized in a different way. And that's had a knock-on effect as well with other age groups as well. I think it's very interesting what's happening societally with the demographics around alcohol. I think it's interesting what you say about phones. Perhaps, the way that we get, or youngsters get their dopamine hits might be different, the whole satisfaction, if you like, associated with scrolling and interaction on social media as well. Having those conversation around that, it can be a change in a demographic consumption of alcohol. Yeah, I found it interesting, Sally, that you mentioned maybe the use of smartphones, maybe the use of technology might have changed that. I haven't actually thought about that before as a causal relationship for the demographic changes, but maybe that whole interaction using devices and social media, and I'm saying this in a positive vein, maybe that's providing a younger community of people with their adrenaline hits, their dopamine hits, their satisfaction, the way that they show up in the world is satisfied in a different way. The socialization certainly is different to when I started work at the back end of the 1980s. We didn't have devices to communicate and create, I'm saying this very positively, create community around. So that whole social lubrication is different these days.
Yeah, it's changing, isn't it? So, Gill, I'd love to understand from you, what was your relationship with alcohol and how did you get into sobriety?
Yeah, so my initial relationship with alcohol was a deep, deep love affair. We're using that word, relationship. So I've always been, and there are some familiar labels that will come out through my story, I have always been a bit of a party girl. I've always enjoyed socializing. When I came down to London, those wine bars were my go-to post-work, and particularly Friday and Saturdays. They were my haunting ground, my drinking ground, in those wine bars in Richmond and in West London and all the lovely, lovely locations that we went to. And the whole party girl thing, when I think about it, it's quite interesting because I'd still apply that label to myself at my great age, but without a wine glass in my hand. But it was almost as if in my 20s and into my 30s, it gave me permission to drink more. I very much joined. I was in the American tech sector based in central London, lots of travel involved in my job, promoted fairly quickly in what I was doing. and really interesting work, and a lot of pub going, and a lot of really good deep friendships at work as well, but centered around the pub, centered around drinking. But really, for me, my relationship with alcohol escalated when I was in my late 40s and early 50s, when I was that classic kind of squashed sandwich generation. So teenage children, I've got three youngsters, well, they're all adults now, and elderly parents, and a job to navigate at the same time. And I was the classic coming into menopause, maybe menopause, perimenopause, into that menopause piece, woman with really heavy burdens on her shoulder, or thinking that they were heavy burdens. No, it was nothing unusual, no busier or more stress than any other woman, but I felt squished from all directions, looking after elderly parents. My mum very sadly had Parkinson's. My father-in-law died very, very suddenly, and we moved my mother-in-law to come and live with us in London because she was disabled. So all of that on top of having three children, teenagers, going through the usual angst of that. My daughter was also diagnosed with OCD. She's great, she's fine, but it was, of course, a stressful time going on then. And my coping mechanism, not even sure I really like that term, but let's use it. My coping mechanism was to look at the bottom of a wine bottle every day. And it became that level. For a number of years, I was drinking a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc every single night. And, I would say that it then moved from a love affair to something that I periodically wanted to divorce. It became quite a toxic love affair. And the irony being that I was working increasingly in neuroscience. I was teaching coaches how to integrate neuroscience into their work so they could work more effectively with their clients and their clients' brains. So from an academic perspective, I knew exactly what the alcohol was doing to my brain. And yet there was kind of this dissonance of not doing anything about it. I really was living a lie. And then there was a dissonance in that. Yeah.
What was that like for you, living that dissonance? Because I'm so interested in dissonance and conflict. I find it fascinating because, you feel it in your body, don't you? This sense of living out of alignment. What were the feelings in your body when you would wake up the next day with, I assume, a hangover, or maybe not, maybe you'd got used to it, and you had to go in and talk and lecture and train on the very thing that you were kind of going against? What did that feel like in your body?
It's very interesting that you ask that, because I think for many, many years, I almost deliberately cut off a switch to listening to my intuition and listening to those signals from my body. Because, I knew within the very cells of my being that the drinking wasn't doing me any good. There were visible, obvious signs from my skin, from weight gain, from mood, obviously in tandem with that period of time through the menopause as well. But that wasn't really the problem. The problem was my mental health, if you like, around it. I really didn't like myself. So you ask the question, what was it like? And I'm going to use some quite strong descriptors here. I was really disgusted with myself. I was repulsed by my dishonesty. And there's a bit of a story around that, because in my late 20s, I was married to my first husband. I'm married, very, very happily married again, which is wonderful. And he had an affair with my best friend. And I came out of that situation with absolutely no dissonance, no dubiety. There was going to be a divorce because I refused to live a dishonest life. And that became my mantra for many, many years. Honesty really is one of my values. You can cut me right down the middle, and, honesty will appear in so many different contexts. Herein lies the dissonance. So I was living in a lie, and I was saying, articulating, telling lies, living secrets, hiding. The other day, I think this says quite a lot about me, I found one of those little bottles of wine that you get from Tesco or the supermarket. And I used to pop those in my case when I would go training around the country, and just have a little bit of extra in my room just in case, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I found one in my underwear drawer, which kind of shows that I haven't cleared out my underwear drawer for 7 years. I quit 7 years ago. But when I found that, I can say it amusingly here, but it brought back some of those feelings that you asked about the dissonance, sort of, wow, I really must have had either been desperately unhappy or desperately low in self-esteem or desperately addicted in some way in order to behave in the way that I hide little Tesco bottles of wine in my underwear drawer.
Yeah, that's
Living a lie
fascinating.
is a dissonant life, and
Yeah.
it'll always get you in the end. Always, it'll catch up with you.
Yeah. So what was the moment you decided enough's enough?
Yeah, well, I remember it honestly like it was yesterday, and in some ways, when I look back, it is really quite amusing. People talk about rock bottom moments. I didn't have a single rock bottom moment. There was nothing illegal. There was nothing that went on that that a member of my family said, or a policeman, or somebody in hospital, or a doctor said, you have to stop. I had kind of like a series of little rock bottom moments that compounded. And the moment happened, well, and it's quite amusing in a way, but maybe that's how I've now created the narrative around it. That my mother-in-law came to live with us, and as I said before, she was disabled. That was really challenging in so many ways. She was a wonderful woman, but it was really challenging with our whole family in many ways. And we had carers coming into the house. She had 5 carers coming in to help her with her personal care, and then my husband and I would look after her in the evenings. But it allowed us to work. The last care visit was at 5 o'clock. And it lasted from 5 until 5:30. And during that period, my mother-in-law would have a whiskey and a cup of tea. So the carer would always come into the kitchen and make a cup of tea. And a young carer who was training to be a nurse and just earning herself extra income, Katie, lovely, lovely young girl, came into the kitchen when I was pouring Sauvignon Blanc into my Gary Barlow mug. Take that fan. Yeah, big take that fan. I was pouring wine into a mug. And this is the dissonance. This is a ridiculous deception. As if pouring it into a mug would stop the fact that she could come into the kitchen and smell that I was drinking wine, could stop me thinking that at 5 o'clock, which had got earlier and earlier, throughout the years, at 5 o'clock was my new wine witching hour. And I felt, Sally, so ashamed, absolutely ashamed that this young kid who was looking after my mother-in-law, a really good kid who was doing extra shifts at caring because she didn't earn enough money as a student nurse. She was in my home, this fortunate middle-class woman in West London, professional woman, who had been reduced to pouring wine into a mug at 5 o'clock. I was so ashamed. And that night, I had a very honest conversation with my husband.
Wow.
And I said to him, and I really did not know where this came from. I said to him, within 2 weeks, I will have quit. I need 2 weeks to do what I do, which is research. I need to really research in my way as to how I can quit.
And this was 7 years ago?
This was 7 years ago in March. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
In March. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. And part of that healing journey was research and sort of education. Was any of that healing journey going to AA or any kind of groups?
No, it wasn't. There was a group, but it was an internet-based group, and I will always be grateful. I was a lurker for years. It's called Soberistas. It's run by a wonderful woman named Lucy Rocker. She's based in Manchester, and it was a website. And it's now been going for more than 10 years, and a global website where any minute of the day, or the night, there would be somebody else on there participating, writing their story, answering threads of conversations or pleas for help. So I didn't really contribute to that for a couple of years. I certainly do so now, but it was a lifeline for me to be connected to that. AA never crossed my mind, or rather, let's go back. It crossed my mind and was rapidly qualified out as as a group for myself. I'm very group oriented. I'm very social, and also having had a learning and development background, I really understand not just the energy of a group, but the collaboration and the really positive elements of learning from a group. AA felt wrong to me from two perspectives, and I really want to put it out here that I am not in the business of disrespecting AA. AA has helped thousands, millions. It's saved millions of lives and continues to do so. The first thing was, and I'm really always interested in people's perspectives around this, I didn't want to say that I was an alcoholic. There's a
Right.
really interesting psychology around alcoholism. I can say now, yeah, I think I had an well, I know I had an alcohol dependency. I struggled with alcohol use disorder, which is what the medics refer to it as. But there was almost a sense of different admission if I'd gone there. And I still don't think I was. And that's interesting. I still explore that with other friends in the sober community around that word alcoholic. The other thing is that, there were a couple of things. From a neuroscience point of view, it's long been known, and I know things have changed over the years, that part of the collaboration and the sort of anchoring into AA, into the group, is around saying, hello, my name is Gill and I am an alcoholic. From a neuroscience point of view, that keeps those neural pathways of you saying that you are an alcoholic nice and strong and deeply carved.
Yeah.
For me, in that statement, there is nothing around, hello, my name is Gill McKay and I'm on a path to sobriety. That feels so much more growth oriented. Or now, as I say, hello, my name is Gill McKay and I don't drink, and I drink water and I drink tea, and it's a really interesting psychology. I felt there was no arrogance there, but I felt therefore that there was let's use that word dissonance again. There was a dissonance for me for going to AA.
Yeah, it makes so much sense as well from a hypnotherapy point of view, where I work with the science of neuroplasticity and the rewiring and the repatterning of the mind and language. Language is so powerful. What you say to yourself, you're basically affirming, you're affirming that limitation and that will never change.
Yes.
And I think there's something around the way that they teach, which for me feels a bit culty or just something that's not quite right.
It is really, really interesting. So one of my family friends has been sober for around 13, 14 years, and she has been a wonderful inspiration to me, the way that she has dealt with her challenges with alcohol. They were different to mine, or they showed up in her life in a different way. Everybody obviously has their different experiences, and she still goes to AA every single week. It is her anchor. It is her she will say, hand on heart, the group is what saved her. She also does amuse me. She lives in Scotland, and she says that she sometimes, when she comes to London on business, she likes to go to a Chelsea meeting because it's a different type of meeting, and she goes out for lunch in Chelsea afterwards, which is it's quite amusing. But it's absolutely she will be a complete promoter of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I talk to her as part of my research. I talked to her about that, but maybe it was actually a first step post alcohol of trusting my intuition that I didn't go to AA, because I had to relearn about, you asked a question early on about signals in my body. I had to relearn to trust all of that, and actually to put the money where my mouth is, understanding neuroscience, but actually finally applying all that theory and that science to myself, and really allowing myself to heal my own nervous system by practicing what I preach.
That's so fascinating. It's a long journey, and the trouble, the difficulty I find is when people come to me for hypnotherapy, for like giving up alcohol or something like that, which can certainly help, and it's a springboarder. But actually the work is done by you applying everything that I put in the recording about trusting yourself, building a relationship with yourself, coming back home to yourself, slowing everything down, understanding the signals of your body. You know, I put all of that in the recording. It's not the recording. Well, the recording helps to rewire the neural pathways and the patterns, but you still have to take action.
Yeah.
And you still have to be on the journey. You can't not be on the journey and expect something outside of yourself to just work. So I'm guessing it was the same for you, in that it was a lived, you know, a complete change of lifestyle, a complete change of like literally morning, noon and night, what you're thinking, the choices you're making, how you're relating to yourself, how you're relating to others. So could you talk us through a little bit about that, what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Every single word you use when you describe the hypnotherapy journey you and the recordings that you offer your clients, it resonates so deeply for me because, you know, we can receive a recording, we can have a really good experience with a coach, a hypnotherapist, a therapist, whoever it might be, and really good interaction. But unless we want to take action, and I really use that word deliberately, unless we are ready to do the work and we really have that desire for change, then it's going to be a real uphill struggle. You know, that motivation element, that real desire for change, I think really matters. So one of the things I tend to have a bit of a rant about, please excuse me, you'll have to control me with this, is I think that sobriety has become an Instagram favorite. You know, it is fashionable and topical, and I'm absolutely delighted about that, because my view is that the more that is spoken sensibly and authentically and truthfully spoken around sobriety, then somebody with any post, any message, whatever they say that day, they might be the catalyst for changing somebody else's lives. However, there's a little element of the Instagram world. It sounds so disrespecting Instagram. I'm really not. It's wonderful. I'm a bit of a scroller and I really enjoy it. But there's a little bit about it that's about sobriety is all unicorns and rainbows. It's all candy floss and sunshine. And hey, when you've lived your life at the bottom of a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc for decades, it really can feel like unicorns and rainbows sometimes. But let's get real. You know, real sobriety is about being able to navigate the ups and downs of day-to-day life, which can sometimes be stressful, frequently be stressful, sometimes be mundane and boring, yeah, and it definitely is different than your drinking days. Real sobriety is navigating the realities of life without your usual prop, yeah, or coping mechanism, if you like, of the drink. It's finding different ways to show up in the world as authentically as you, but also with different resources and tools to be able to deal with all of that. So I discovered for myself, intellectually I knew this, of course, that it's not all unicorns and rainbows, that it is indeed a messy journey. You know, that it often feels like there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and sometimes the other, 1 step forward and even 2 steps back. I think for me, what was really interesting, and it's worth putting it out there, and maybe it's just the way my brain is wired, maybe it's because I am very research based, I like to look at a lot of evidence. For me, that day when Katie was in the kitchen, my mother-in-law's carer, and that night when I spoke to my husband, I made a decision.
Yeah.
And it was a really, it was a promise to myself that in that moment I knew I would keep, because I never wanted another Gary Barlow Sauvignon wine embarrassment, shameful experience in front of a young girl who I deeply respect the life that she had chosen for herself and was living in complete gratitude for. You know, I never wanted to have that experience. It was enough to push me over my tipping point into honestly having an honest discussion with myself, to looking dissonance in the face and doing something about it. So I knew
That is
intellectually
powerful.
it is powerful, yeah. Dissonance can be a really, really good teacher if we allow it to be.
Yeah, if we
But dissonance,
listen.
yeah, dissonance can also feel so repulsive and horrible that if you're a drinker, you'll just drown it out with a bit more booze because it feels
Yes.
nasty. So you'll numb it out. So when you're no longer numbing out the dissonance, you've got to look it in the face. And that isn't a formulaic way to quitting the booze. You've got to do the work for yourself. You've got to be prepared to acknowledge and finally face your emotions, because fundamentally that's what alcohol does.
Yeah.
It depresses our central nervous system, so it dilutes in some ways our emotions. It provides a channel, a way for us to be able to deal with sadness, grief. That part of mine was grief. I lost my parents, and I was living with my mother-in-law. And frankly, at the time, I'd have preferred to have had my own parents than my mother-in-law around. And
Sure.
there was resentment. That's another emotion. All these
Yeah.
horrid emotions that I wasn't proud of. But what it also did, Sally, and I didn't really know this until afterwards, was it numbed out the lovely things as well. So I could never be, well, never's a big word, but I really think I could apply it to my context. I could never enable myself to be truly happy because I didn't really know what happiness was, because I was constantly numbing out my emotions, and boo, down went all my neurotransmitters and my natural GABA and serotonin, because I was numbing out those moments too. And I think this, to a degree, is where the kind of candy floss and rainbows Instagram things come in, because I think almost universally for people who quit the booze, they all of a sudden discover right on their doorstep a really lovely world that has been, there are daisies, there are flowers in the park, there are puppies playing. I know it sounds all a little bit sort of fun and frivolous, but it really can be a new discovery that all of these things
Yeah.
have been happening around us, but we never allowed ourselves to notice them because we were numbing our emotions.
It's the small pleasures, isn't it?
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was an author, Catherine Gray. She was one of the first authors writing about sobriety. Her first book was The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, but her second book, which is almost better, is The Unexpected Joy of the Ordinary. And
Yeah.
that is a really beautiful book because it reminds us about life.
This episode is brought to you by my Cold Water Therapy Practitioner's Diploma. This online self-paced course is for you if you're in the well-being industry and you want to become a certified cold water therapy practitioner with this globally accredited and insurable diploma. The popularity of cold water therapy is on the rise as people look for alternative ways to manage pain and inflammation, boost their immunity, lose weight, improve mental health, and keep themselves adapted to stress. This course covers the history of cold water therapy, facts about cold water, the physiological and mental changes that occur during cold water exposure, acclimatization, non-shivering thermogenesis, after-drop and rewarming, the multiple benefits of cold water therapy, including its effect on your metabolism, immune system, and mental health, how to offer cold water therapy to clients safely and effectively using ice baths or out in a body of water. It includes breath work for cold exposure, polyvagal theory, how to minimize fear of the cold, and the business of cold water therapy. In this course, you get 1 hour of on-demand video, 37 articles with audio transcriptions for learning on the go, 7 in-depth modules. It's assessed via multiple choice, and you can retake as many times as you need to. You get lifetime access, mobile access, access to an online community, one-to-one support, badges for your website, and a lovely certificate on completion. So what are you waiting for? Become a cold water therapy practitioner today for just £127. To enroll, just head on over to sallygarozzo.com/cold. This episode is brought to you by my 30-day transformational rapid rewire package, which includes the infamous rapid transformational therapy. Here's why it can help at menopause. You see, menopause is not just an estrogen deficiency. It's a complete life transition that often requires a deeper look at what's driving our anxiety, insomnia, relationship issues, disordered eating and drinking, and even the financial issues we have, not to mention the physical symptoms. RTT with me inside my 30-day transformational rapid rewire package can absolutely help with that. RTT is a therapeutic process that uses powerful evidence-based techniques to provide you with the tools that you need to make positive change. The roots of RTT are drawn from traditional psychotherapy, CBT, positive suggestion therapy, parts therapy, inner child work, and mindfulness. But what makes it super powerful is that the process is done under hypnosis. Now, hypnosis is nothing weird. It's just an altered state of focus, just like the one you get into when you're watching a really good film. I'm 100% committed to making our time together beautiful, memorable, and life-changing. Working with me is highly personalized and helps you to reframe any negative beliefs, values, habits, and emotions, many of which you may have carried with you since childhood. Together, we tap into your superconscious mind, giving you the potential to alter the way that you think and put an end to negative self-talk and self-sabotage so that you can approach life in a positive way and move forward liberated from whatever ails you. If you're interested to know more, just visit bit.ly/RTT with Sally. I can't wait to support you through this life-changing transition. Yeah, and those day to day, and how we can get like a link, we can get a hook into pleasure using our day to day sort of life where there is no hoopla, there is no party per se, but we can look at a mug, or we can find pleasure in like a warm cup of tea and just really like learn how to sink into it and be in the present moment with it.
Exactly so. And I think that's where you've hit the nail on the head, is about learning to be present. That was a massive part of my journey to sobriety, was being comfortable with being present. And in that, being comfortable and learning to be comfortable with being present with whatever emotions were there in the moment. The reality was, and I think it's true for so many people who've drunk alcohol for as long as I did, I drank for decades, is I honestly didn't really know who I was alcohol free.
Yeah.
That dissonance again of not liking myself, and I use marketing taglines like reclaiming life and all of that sort of thing. But as I was en route to reclaiming life, who was Gill in her 50s? Because Gill had never been sober in her 50s before. So all of a sudden, here was this woman, myself, who emerging from the sort of fog of alcohol and addiction and menopause, because I couldn't dissociate the feelings of menopause from hangovers. There was no unraveling really of that. Who was I going to be? Because I took up drinking in grand style in my late 20s. So, that was decades. Who was this Gill without the alcohol? It's not a linear journey, and it can be a messy old journey of discovery with lots of peaks. But yes, there are some troughs along the route as well.
Yes. There's so much I want to unpack there. Well, first of all, the decision to quit. I've had something similar myself, where I was in 2019 and I had met some friends in the pub and I'd had 2 gin and tonics. It was around Christmas time. I think it was like the 24th of December or something like that, ridiculously close to Christmas. And I was walking back from the pub and I felt so ill just through having 2 gin and tonics. I felt so bloated, like my stomach was out here. And I just said to myself, it's not worth it. And I never well, I was a big drinker in my 20s and probably 30s, and then just started slowing down. I'm really sensitive, like my cycle is really sensitive to alcohol. So the week coming up to my period, even though I might have wanted a glass of wine, it's like my body just, I knew my body. And I suppose that's quite a good thing. I have always been quite in tune with my body. So I was able to sense that, that message that my body was giving me. But yeah, like I do remember that sort of I call it like a lightning bolt decision where you're like, you know what? I know from this moment forward, I know that feeling. That feeling is like energy running through my body saying, this is not for you. There is something better for you on the other side. So it didn't really take much for me to stop drinking alcohol. It's taken a lot more for me to stop eating sugar. That's my sort of nemesis. But yeah, I do sort of understand that kind of like epitome moment, that decision moment. And it really is like you know when you know. And if you haven't had that knowing, like you haven't had it. It's like it comes upon you at the right moment, almost like a force outside of yourself. It feels like, even though I'm sure it's probably coming from inside, but it does feels like an intervention in a way, like an energetic intervention.
Yes.
So I'm glad you said that, because I saw myself in that decision that you were speaking about there. And then the other thing I wanted to speak to was the messy troughs. And I think we have to be ready to feel difficult feelings. And we live in a society where we're not trained how to deal with difficult feelings. We like to bypass, the whole thing that old school parents usually, I don't know, I'm not a parent, I don't have much story around that, but what I hear often is this I don't know, paradigm, I suppose, of I only ever want you to be happy. This idea, I only ever want you to be happy. I only want the best for you. Well, it's like, well, what if I'm not happy? Imagine you're saying that to a child, I only ever want you to be happy. And the child feels sad. Now they're letting mum and dad down, and they must never let mum and dad down because they are absolutely reliant on them for their life. Yes. And so to save their lives, they park all of their difficult emotions and only operate on that sort of superficial happy level. Now, that's not all parents and that's not all of society, but that is the main paradigm, I think, that we operate in the world at large, certainly in the Western world. Yeah. And I think that's why we're seeing so many of these dis-eases of suppression, whether it's drugs, alcohol, shopping, pornography, whatever. It's because we don't know how to relate to those messy emotions when we're in the gutter. So I suppose my question to you would be, how did you deal with those difficult feelings when they were rising up?
Yes, well, gosh, both of what you said then resonates so much from a parenting point of view, and also when you go back that whole single decision piece as well. And it's a challenging question to answer in a pure sense, because I had to live moment to moment through all those messy troughs and all of that. However, my anchor actually was my single decision. It's interesting what you said about that. I knew in every, whatever the popular phrase is, bone in my body and every cell in my body, that this was not a challenge to myself, that this is a single decision. This was real. This was I reframed it as an opportunity. And I think when I look back, I probably used all of my coaching experience. I've been a qualified coach for decades, and NLP and then all the neuroscience training on top of it. I think I finally started to apply it to myself. I did an awful lot of self-coaching. I was very fortunate because I had an extremely supportive partner who, we've got a very good marriage. We're best friends at the core. And he asked me a wonderful question, which was about, how can I support you through this journey? And for me, it was all about, be honest, but be there. And he really was, and that was monumentally helpful. And I kind of used I'll come back to the decision in a moment. I kind of used, in a way, the AA mantra of one step at a time rather than one day at a time, because I never wanted to be in the one day having to make a fresh decision every day. But that everything, I recognized that there wasn't a magic formula, that everything that I did or experienced on one day was a step. And it was a step forward, even if it felt like, oh, it doesn't feel so good. I don't feel very congruent or aligned with this, or it's new, or I'm learning something and I don't like it. It feels really scary. It was still a step forward. So I reframed so much of the way I approached lives. And from a practical point of view, I set up new routines. So I broke habits, the conscious habit, the 5 o'clock Gary Barlow mug. And I still do have my Gary Barlow mug, but he's always accompanied with a cup of tea now. But, those habits were completely changed and, deliberately and consciously changed. So my 5 o'clock habit, my 5 o'clock drinking habit, which had been brought forward from 6 o'clock over the years, that became my writing time. So I wrote my book, Stuck, not because, and yes, I wanted to write a book around neuroscience for coaches and take all my work, but that had never been the dream. It became the healing. So my words, my writing, it was my 5 o'clock healing. It was a completely new habit. I wrote with a pen. So I was physically holding something, and that really, really helped me. And then I transferred it onto a computer, and I did voice notes, etc., to help it move onto a computer. So the physical motor action of using a pen helped with my hands, because it's not just the liquid, it's the motor action that you're used to there. My morning habit became completely different as well. Thank God for dogs. We had 2 Labradors who were in there when I quit. They were in their sort of like slightly post puppy stage, but definitely very energetic stage. So every day, come rain or shine, the dog walk became first thing in the morning. And I honestly think those boys saved my life, because because they also are really good listeners. Not in terms of running off in the park, but they're really good listeners when it comes to me coming to terms with my emotions. So I talk to them an awful lot. So a lot of this was practical. It was about putting new routines in place. It was also about compassion. And compassion is a really strong word, self-compassion, just cutting myself some slack in terms of how I might feel. So sometimes I just went to bed, I allowed myself more duvet days, perhaps, that I had before. I've always been very driven. I've always had that sort of like hand on my back and come on, Gill, you can do more. So I became more gentle with myself. And of course, then my research was teaching me more and more about calming my nervous system. So, I kind of joke about it now, but if anybody had ever said to me that I would be recording guided meditations, let alone using them, 7 years ago, I'd have just laughed in their face and had another swig, So there were lots of, I learned to build a toolkit, both a practical toolkit, but an emotional toolkit that I still use to this day. And it's interesting, actually, Sally, I discovered the other day, and this came out in I run a sober group for sober curious and sober people on a Tuesday evening, and it just came out during the conversation that since I've quit drinking 7 years ago, I've never poured a glass of wine for one of my friends.
Wow.
And my husband, it's really interesting, isn't it? My husband and I are really social, and the roles of, unless it's a barbecue, the roles have tended to split. That I do more of the cooking and he'd do more of the hosting with the drinks. And I asked him about it afterwards, and he said to me, "Oh, but that was one of the ways I could quietly support you." Because I wanted to continue to socialize, and have my friends around me and start to be proud about my socializing without drinking. And that's so interesting that after 7 years, I have never picked up a bottle of wine, whether white or red, and poured a glass for a friend.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and I would imagine that helps to maintain the sobriety as well, because it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. And, like
Yeah.
you don't see cigarettes anymore like you used to. And I find that if I walk past a bakery and if I look at the cakes, it really sets the whole kind of brain in motion. I start to salivate. But if I walk past the bakery and don't look, I don't have to fight with
No.
the want and the yearning. So looking away or not seeing, but I guess it's harder if you're at a dinner table with people who are drinking.
Yeah, what we did in the early days, and it's so interesting what you say about the bakery, because I just went straight to sugar, after the wine. But in the early days, I had a conversation, obviously, with my children. I mean, they never drank wine at the table, but my mother-in-law would have wine every night, and well, we would have wine every night at the table. And when my mother-in-law was alive, we were very conscious to bring her to the table because she didn't have much in her life. She was disabled, so dinner was a thing, which is actually a very good thing in a family anyway. However, there would always be wine poured. So I had a conversation with both her and my husband. Well, my husband and I had kind of talked about this beforehand, that we, for the first few months, and it was March and we were going on holiday in the July. So we kind of used that as the demarcation, if you like, that the holiday would change things for us, that we wouldn't serve wine at the table. And she was quite thrilled because it just meant that she had another glass of whiskey. And I never liked whiskey. I was sick in the dog bowl at 16 when I had whiskey at a party. So
Right.
thank you, whiskey. I never liked whiskey. It wasn't an issue for me. And I totally supported her drinking her whiskey. I know it took the edge off her pain, and it was something she looked forward to every evening. So she would have a whiskey, and my husband didn't drink any wine in front of me. And the deal was, or what he offered me was, I won't drink either until we go on holiday. And we were going to meet some friends in Singapore, and I knew he would drink then, and that's absolutely fine. And that was 4 months, and it really was enough. It was a wonderful support, and it was hugely helpful. And we didn't entertain people. We went met some friends. We'd entertain people for lunch and brunch rather than dinner until after that holiday. So there was
Yeah.
some practical stuff that was put into place. But my husband is a gin drinker. I mean, he's not a drinker at all. He's a real take it or leave it drinker. I wish I could be a take it or leave it drinker. I never could. But we have a very big gin collection. So there was never going to be that practical step of taking alcohol out of the house, and that actually for me was very helpful. And it's something that some of my clients want to do. One client has removed all of the wine in the house to the garage. So, it's like they say at diet clubs or slimming clubs, if you're going to have it, then make it a conscious decision. And you walked there to get, rather than just reaching automatically, you walked to go and get your chocolate. So she did that. For us, we just, I lived with the alcohol around me. I wanted to be able to do that partly because my mother-in-law drank, and because we have the gin collection.
The gin
And
collection.
yeah, one of the things I think is important, just like you with the bakery, we learn to live with these triggers all around us. There will always be off licenses. Well, maybe they will be behind the white cupboards in Tesco like the cigarettes in the future, who knows? But there will always be bakeries, and in my house there'll always be a gin collection, which I view as an art installation these days, because the labeling in gin is just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's about, I taught myself not to be fearful of living with alcohol all around me. And I think long term that's really helped. Really
Yes.
helped.
And also
Yeah.
it opens you up to that idea of choice, because I think sometimes maybe in sobriety we can get quite self-righteous about it and like nobody should drink. But
Yeah.
actually when you feel comfortable with your choice for not drinking, you can also say, well, you know what, it's okay if other people drink. And I'm like you, I am obsessed with art. I love art, and I love how alcohol bottles look. When I go into a bar, I've recently went to Bacchanalia in Mayfair for my husband's birthday, and it was just like, oh my God, I was like, a child in a sweet shop. But, I did order a glass of champagne, I think it was. I drank half of it and then my husband finished it off. But just looking, and there's so much artistry in these bottles.
Yes.
So I totally understand what you mean about the gin collection. Yeah. And how you've learned to live with it. is amazing. I just think that's probably part of your social nature as well. You know, you have that live and let live kind of vibe and interest and that curiosity in other people. I have a personal question. Well, actually, it's not personal. Well, I don't know. It might be. Did you did you experience? No, it's really not. Like, personal interest of mine, I suppose, is where I'm coming from. Did you experience any physical withdrawal symptoms?
Yes, I did. I did, and I was also, because you've used a word before that is one of my values, but it also describes me, because I'm genuinely very curious and I'm research based. Whenever I experienced a symptom, I would always ask myself, is this physical or is it mental? You know,
Yeah.
is it a thought and the sort of streaming of the thoughts and the running rampant, or, of the thoughts? Is that feeding my physical symptoms? But, again, intellectually, I knew that at the absolute most, the alcohol is going to be out of your body within 10 days. And that's if you're caning bottles of spirits every night. So physically, the alcohol would be out of my body, but it didn't mean that my neurotransmitters and my brain chemistry would have returned to any form of, non-alcoholic levels. There needed to be repair that had been done. I felt enormously depleted. And I am a naturally push through, motivated, energetic person. So I was expecting to be depleted. But that felt really quite alien to me. And I realized very early on that I'd used alcohol as a boost, even though, again, intellectually, I knew it was only the first glass or the first piece that gave you the boost. After that, it depressed the nervous system. So I did feel physical cravings. I think in the early days, I sweated it out of my system. That sounds really disgusting, but I did. There was, a bit of the sweating it out of my system. I was engaging right from day one in different activities, far more walking, far more, just doing different routines within a practical sense. But later on, say within, let's say, a month, I could go to a journal and look at this specifically. When I felt a craving, I recognized it as a mental craving, that it was
Right.
driven by a thought. And of course, our thoughts can drive our bodies and vice versa. But that it was driven by a desire or some form of motivation rather than that physical craving in the body. What I did, and it's not something that I would recommend to my clients because it's a very, very common thing, and it in itself is tricky to move on from. You mentioned it before, is about sugar. I immediately changed my lifestyle from a drinking lifestyle, evening lifestyle, to a brunchy barista cappuccino and chocolate brownie lifestyle. That became my reward, and I associated the gorgeous coconut milk cappuccino and chocolate brownie as being, oh, I deserve this, and there became a strong association with this. So subsequent years in my sort of not completely trying to quit sugar, but managing sugar has been also quite interesting. And actually, to be candid with you, Sally, because I haven't made that single decision about sugar, I found that much harder. I'm not sure I could walk past a bakery and not look in the window, because the smells are so evocative for me, so interesting for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the cravings is a really interesting one. Now, what I know and what I advise my clients is that if you have, I call them the 5 nature's medicines. It's almost like your 5 a day. And they are sensible. We all know these. But if we have these foundational blocks in place, building blocks for ourselves, then we're supporting ourselves. So they are good nutrition, good hydration, exercise, sleep, and breath work. So those 5 things, if you can have those in place and really honor yourself with those 5 building blocks, if you like, not even around sobriety, but around healthy living, then you're giving yourself and the potential cravings a better chance. There are also supplements we can take. I'm a massive advocate of magnesium and zinc, and there are, but we can get a lot of these, the nutrition through a really good diet. And it all sounds so terribly boring, doesn't it? You're stopping your reward with the Sauvignon Blanc, and then you're going on a healthy diet.
Yeah, for sure. But I think something I want to pick up on there, what you said, was about swapping the evening lifestyle with the brunchy lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's so key. And that's probably why I'm an early bird.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of evenings because there's nothing for me to do in the evenings. And I wish there were more. I wish the shops were open in the evenings here in Brighton, because I would happily go and spend a fortune in the shops in Brighton in the evening, just weaving in and out, chatting to the shopkeepers and just having that as my sort of social interaction. But I get they need to have a rest. I love that idea of could you get what you get from evenings? Could you get that in a different part of the day so that you're not tempted to do that whole sort of pub culture thing and get your socializing in as well differently?
Yeah. Exactly, that's really interesting. And we've so what also happened was, we classic sort of woman of my age and sort of with the mums from school, I'm in a book club, and we even, and this was my friends supporting me, it was just fantastic. We even moved some of the book clubs, that meetings from the pub. They were always in a pub rather than somebody's house, because we'd kind of moved on from somebody feeling the obligation to cook, so we would meet in the pub. So we'd move them to Saturday lunchtimes and we'd have a brunch. And that is just gorgeous, and now we actually all really love the brunch. We've got, where we live, there are lots of cafes that support a sort of brunchy lifestyle, which is fantastic. So it's all possible, it's all doable. And if ever, the book club's quite an interesting thing, because we did meet of an evening relatively recently, and there are 9 of us in the book club. I think 8 turned up that evening, and out of 8 of us, we were in the pub. I think there were 6 of us had a cup of tea. The poor pub owners, because we're not exactly helping them with their profits. But it's about making deliberate choices to mix up your day. And it's interesting what you said. I would always have described myself as an owl, but I am now a lark. I'm absolutely a lark, because finally my sleep is better. There was the hormone piece in it, the menopause, and the sugar, was involved in that. And I like daylight. I like being awake in the daylight, and then that has been helped by more of the brunchy lifestyle rather than the evening lifestyle.
Sure, yeah, brilliant. So in terms of menopause then, how did alcohol affect your menopausal symptoms? Could you even tell what was what?
No, I really couldn't. So I am now postmenopausal, very grateful to be postmenopausal. And, I just had a ghastly few years, 5 years or so. And it's so interesting, because one of my dearest friends is a local lady who I met networking, has become a great friend, is a menopause coach. And of course I heard, read all about the symptoms, and the menopause coaching in itself was becoming like sobriety coaching. They were, very pleased that there was more of a voice around menopause in the last decade or so. But I couldn't untangle any menopause symptoms from drinking. I couldn't. I was, I had hot flushes, or hot flashes, however you pronounce them. I didn't sleep desperately well at all. I had a lot of headaches, I had a lot of the usual symptoms that could have been down to either of those. But what I do know from a research perspective, of course, is that the drinking would have exacerbated my menopause symptoms. I feel very fortunate that sort of gynecologically over the years I've been healthy. My dad was a gynecologist. I don't know whether we were just brought up with gynecological conversations in the house as kids. I didn't have my mum had a hysterectomy when she was in her late 30s, so I didn't have that to follow what her menopause journey was, although that's not necessarily going to be what my menopause journey would be. But my menopause journey was a drinking journey.
Yes.
I can't, Sally, I can't untangle it. which is both interesting and in a way maybe it's sad. So I can't really talk to that.
Yeah. But it's interesting what you say, the sobriety movement and the menopause movement. There are definitely links, as you find a lot more people going through the menopause are deciding to stop drinking because of the exacerbated symptoms, which actually begs the question, what is alcohol doing to our nervous system, our brain, our neurochemistry?
Well, yeah, I mean, this could be an hour's podcast, if not
Yeah,
more, on its own. It affects the receptors for many of our neurotransmitters. So it
yeah,
really messes with our brain chemistry. And therefore, because it's messing with our brain chemistry, it's messing with the regulation of our nervous system. So
yeah,
actually, alongside menopause and sobriety, we probably see on Instagram another popularized terminology around resetting your nervous system. It's another
sure.
cool topic that people talk about, but we tend to be depleted in various neurotransmitters. GABA and serotonin are building blocks for. I think that those are the boosters, and so you've got the boosters and the brakes of your system. So those that
Right.
calm you and those that keep you motivated, which is more around the dopamine is the
Yeah.
motivation neurotransmitter, and it isn't uniform with people. Different lifestyles, habits, body chemistry, brain chemistry may affect different neurotransmitters with different women. And of course, the effect of their menopause would be different. But alcohol doesn't do you any favors in your menopause. It stops the absorption of calcium, so we lose. It contributes to the whole osteoporosis debate. It exacerbates, if that's the word, or exaggerates or enhances, and that's a positive word, enhances, but I'm saying it from a negative point of view, the flushes, because it's alcohol. It dilates your blood vessels, so and so therefore it's a speedier route to the hot flushes. It certainly isn't going to help them in any way, and it stops the absorption of some of the natural vitamins and minerals that we may be getting from we may have a decent diet during our menopause, but it stops the uptake of that. And of
Yeah.
course, our liver's working on overtime because our
Yeah.
liver's working on the alcohol first, because of the speed of the alcohol that it rushes through your bodily system and into the bloodstream so quickly. So the liver is in overdrive. It's going to be in overdrive dealing with the natural hormones anyway during the menopause and the ups and downs of those hormones, but the alcohol is the head girl in that. So unfortunately, the alcohol will always get the attention.
Yes, because the body wants to do something with it as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, and on top
Yeah.
of that, you have the weight gain. There's alcohol. It are absolute empty calories. There
Yeah.
is no, despite what you will read, and you'll know this about antioxidants in red wine, you'd need to drink a vineyard before you got the benefits of a blueberry. I mean, I'm being a tad facetious there, but you know. Yes, there are some antioxidants contained within some of the alcohol products, but not in the quantities that we drink for it to form a real benefit
Yeah.
around that. So weight gain's a big thing.
Yeah.
And also, but I think for me, almost the biggest thing is the mood, and that comes back to serotonin and GABA,
Yeah.
and our lack of motivation. So it's the mental health, it's the effect it has on our self-esteem, and
Yeah.
yet the irony is that we drink because we feel rubbish about ourselves. It often becomes that spiraling loop, again back to that dissonance.
Yeah.
So it can have, at a time when we go through so much physical and mental change, which can be in menopause framed as a reinvention, as a time of our life where we were setting new goals, and it can be a reset. To drink on top of that, I almost think it's inevitable that the drinking will put more of a negative frame around menopause in so many ways, both physically and also mentally.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. It all makes so much sense. And finally, just one last question. the stigma around sobriety. I know this is the nature of your TED Talk and we haven't got time to go into it loads. So if you do want to understand more about the stigma, please go and watch Gill's TEDx talk. But what is it that what do you wish more people would know about sobriety? And just about alcohol in general?
Yeah. So I don't come from a place of judgment. I absolutely don't. As we said right at the beginning of this conversation, alcohol is enmeshed in our society. So I think the one thing is that alcohol is a choice, just like we can choose what we eat, we could choose to be a vegetarian or we can choose to eat meat. We can also choose to drink tea or water, and we don't need to have alcohol in our glass to have a good time, to be socially integrated. We don't need that. Alcohol is a choice. And I think that's really important for us to understand. It's a choice for health, and we can make that choice for ourselves. Yeah, and I think that one of the worst things that I experienced when I was sober, or initially became sober, and I do talk about this in my TED Talk, is that people want to foist alcohol upon you. And for me, I now recognise that that's almost universally holding up a mirror, that because somebody else has quit the drinking might mean that there's a bit of discomfort, back to that word dissonance, around somebody's own drinking as well.
It's flagging up their dissonance.
Maybe. Yeah. So we don't need to. Alcohol, drinking, whatever we put into, whatever we consume, and I include in that, social media, what we're consuming in terms of thoughts we put into our brain, whatever we consume is our choice, and we don't have to drink.
And we don't have to feel bad about not drinking either.
We absolutely don't need to feel bad about not drinking. Absolutely not. And it's not something we need to justify. It's our choice, and we can own that.
Yes. I love that. Thank you so much, Gill, for sharing your wonderful story, your energy, your knowledge, your wisdom that you've learned over the last 7 years on your sobriety journey. And I do hope that if anyone's listening and they're struggling with alcohol, reach out to Gill. I'm sure she's got plenty of resources for you, and she knows the right organisations to send you to. Your website, I'm going to put all of your links in the show notes, but where are you most active on social media, would you say?
Most active on LinkedIn. That's really where I hang out. Increasingly, I'm doing more work with organisations and getting that message out that we to be more inclusive, and to really understand that some employees who may be struggling with alcohol, that we can create safe places so they won't be judged if they ask for help.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's wonderful. Really, really valid work and so needed in the world. So thank you so much, Gill. Thanks for spending this time with us.
Thank you, Sally, for asking me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So I'd love to know what your biggest takeaways were. Be sure to leave a comment below and subscribe, like and share. Just so you know, not all podcasts are uploaded here. So if you want the full array of episodes, head on over to Spotify or Apple and search The Menopause Mindset. You also might like to come and find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn or TikTok. Just search at Sally Garozzo Mind Mentor. All right, folks, thank you so much for your support and attention. It means the world. Have a great week and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.